Hello, everyone, and welcome to our closing plenary, Activating Your Voice for Action. My name is Marco Fabian Sanchez, and I am the Grassroots Advocacy Officer for UNA USA. And I am so thrilled to kick off this closing plenary as we close our programming portion of our week of action. We hope you all have been enjoying the sessions and the programs that have been taking place over these past couple of days. But I want to take this opportunity right now to really hone us back in and get us pumped for these next couple of days that are ahead. On Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, we have a really great opportunity to meet with our elected officials to tell them everything that we learned throughout these past couple of days and to really make a case for strong US leadership at the United Nations. And that's where all of you come in. So I want to thank you ahead of time for all the work that you've been doing to advocate for the UN in your own communities. I want to thank you for being here right now. And I want to thank you for taking the time to meet with your members of Congress in these next couple of days. We really can't do the work that we do as an organization without your support and without your help. So thank you so much for your dedication to UN advocacy. I want to pass it now over to the experts in the field. We have a few constituents joining us from various parts of the country. Jackson, Alyssa, Tina, and Jay are all seasoned advocates coming from various different walks of life. And I want to give them an opportunity to give you some tips, recommendations, and best practices on how to make an effective case for US funding for the UN, but more broadly, how to make an effective case for issues that you're passionate about. Because at the end of the day, remember, our advocacy is only as strong as our story and as our passions and storytelling. And when we meet with our elected officials and their staff, we want to make sure that we're presenting a compelling story to them. So I want to pass it first over to Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Marco. Hi, everyone. My name is Jackson Schuffelbein. I am just ending my role as the West Region Campus Fellow. So Alyssa and I were both Campus Fellows, and that means we help the campus chapters of UNA USA be successful in advocating for the UN. And we've both learned a few things in our time in these roles about how you can be successful with doing this. I would tell everyone, like Marco said, advocacy is about storytelling. So find a way to pick whatever cause you want to advocate for and speak with people about, and tell a story about why it's important to you, and make it something that's not only about statistics that can speak in their own way, but a combination of statistics on why something is so impactful and why it's so important, but also why it's so important to you. If you can really make people feel your passion and how you've been affected by something you're advocating for, I think that it makes your cause all that much more powerful and people are willing to listen to you. And the second tip I would give is follow up after you speak with your elected officials or whoever you're speaking with. Follow up with something that they can take away after, whether that's just an email thanking them with a summary of what you've talked about, handout, something of that sort. But if you stay in their ear multiple times, they're more likely to remember you and they will remember your story. And I will hand it off to Alyssa for anything you want to share.
Thank you, Jackson. So like Jackson, I also served as a UNA USA Campus Fellow for the Northeast. And I also served as the advocacy lead for my chapter at Northeastern University. Definitely want to second everything Jackson said. Also to add in another thing is that it might be nerve-wracking, especially to reach out to different elected officials and really present issues that you're deeply passionate about or legislation that you believe they should support. But it's ultimately important to remember that these individuals were elected to represent you. So when I've met with my elected officials in Michigan, which is my hometown, it might seem daunting overall, especially just thinking, oh, I'm just one person. But ultimately, these people are representing my area within the state, they and my state overall. And I have the ability to reach out to them to let them know that these issues relating to global health or gender equality are things that I'm passionate about. So I really just say, keep that in mind, be fearless. And ultimately, they are doing their job is to really represent you and the issues that you believe in.
Thank you, Jackson and Alyssa. Alyssa, I love that line, be fearless. And indeed, we are fearless. we ought to be fearless when meeting with our elected officials. So appreciate that comment. I'm going to pass it now over to Jay and Tina to give their perspective as seasoned UN advocates on how to make an effective case to their members of Congress, or to your members of Congress, I should say. Let's pass it over to Jay.
Well, thank you very much. I think Alyssa and Jackson did a very good job on explaining how important it is when you begin these meetings with your congressmen or with their representatives to explain who you are and why you advocate for the United Nations. The story is important to them. They want to know who you are, why you're in the office, why you're bothering them, why you're insistent, and why you're passionate about these issues. So yes, you have to introduce yourself, explain a little bit who you are and why you're in the United Nations Association. Do so with a mind to the clock. If you have about 10 people going to visit a congressman, you can't all spend 5 minutes talking about yourselves. You have to, make the essential points and then leave the rest for the discussion itself. I think that as you do that, the other thing that you might want to consider is who's on the other side of the table. You have to introduce yourself, you have to explain why you're there, but you have to also understand a little bit about who these congressmen or congresswoman is and what motivates them. You will find that it's very important to go on their web pages before tomorrow, find out what committees they're on. It's very helpful to know, see what kind of caucuses they've joined. This may not come up in the discussion itself, but it might inform how you approach the discussion and who you're talking with. I think that would be very helpful. The other thing is look for common ground. In some cases, that common ground might be a little bit hard to find, but it should be explored. In my case, I'll be working with the Kansas delegation tomorrow. We have a very notably progressive member of Congress who represents the more populated part of Kansas, Sharice Davids. And one of the things that we want to talk to her about and thank her for participating in the Global Engagement Summit that the UNA had in February. She spoke on the issue of Indigenous people's rights, and she's one of the first 2 Native American women to be elected to Congress. So we have a lot of common ground issues with her. The same thing with Emmanuel Cleaver in Missouri, because my members are on both sides of the state line, so we have to cover a lot of territory. But Emmanuel Cleaver was mayor of Kansas City for 8 years, hosted 8 of our dinners celebrating the anniversary of the United Nations. So we have a lot of common ground there too. Now we go to Kansas, the senatorial people, which is a little bit different. They're both Republicans, both conservative, and you might think that there's nothing in common at all, but that's not really true. Both members of the Senate from Kansas are supporters of the World Food Program. They do it for the constituents. I mean, it's a farm state in many cases. And, the farmers like to feel good about feeding the people of the world. It's something that is important to them, actually. And the other thing is it's good for the Kansas economy because we send our wheat over to people who are hungry and in need in other countries. And so the Kansas delegation has always been very supportive of the World Food Program. Our challenge is to make sure that they understand that it's the United Nations World Food Program and not just the World Food Program. And that one reason the WFP is so successful is its connection with the United Nations. We also, will do the same thing on peacekeeping operations because of the presence in our community of the Fort Leavenworth, the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College, and we've found that the Republican delegations, once again from the Senate, from the state of Kansas, are very supportive of peacekeeping, actually. And so we'll want to, reinforce that support. Now, we may not agree on a lot of other things, but that's a good entry point to begin with what you have in common, what interests and directions you share, and then, draw the connections on why this is important to put it within the UN context. And so those are the kinds of things. Look for common ground, explain who you are, find out a little bit more about them. And I think you'll have a very productive meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. I'm going to pass it over to Tina and for us to close out with any final tips and recommendations. Tina, what do you have to say?
Unmute, Tina.
Tina,
Unmute.
I believe you're muted, Tina.
So sorry. I always start off with, I am your constituent. I don't tell them, but they know that means that I can vote for you. And they're very attuned to knowing who their voter constituency is. It's very important, as Jay said, to look up their bio. And in particular, I think everyone knows Senator Mitch McConnell. He had polio when he was young, and because of that, he is very sensitive to certain things related to that. So it's always good to know who you're talking to, and also if you have any examples of something that you're concerned about, to give those. I just want to say very briefly that with the recent volcano eruption that took place 20 miles from Goma, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the UN agencies of WHO, UNICEF, and all are helping. This is just one example of why the US needs to pay its share to the UN, so funds are available in disasters. Over 400,000 displaced persons from the lava flow. So if you can give a current issue and relate it and make a point with it, that's also very good, and I thank you.
Thank you, Tina, Jay, and of course, thank you, Jackson and Alyssa, again, for providing that perspective. As you all can see, these 4 folks are just 4 of our 20,000 UNA USA members that are advocating for the UN in their communities. But they are also really seasoned advocates that have their own different perspectives. You know, we've learned a lot. You know, I personally took away that we need to be ourselves. We need to be fearless. We need to be prepared. And luckily, we are here to help you, you know, be your authentic self, to be prepared before those meetings take place. I want to take this opportunity now to pass it over to Jordy Hannum from the Better World campaign, who will offer an additional perspective on how we can best be prepared for our meetings that are taking place on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And Jordy will offer a perspective as a former Hill staffer on how we can make that compelling argument for strong U.S. leadership at the United Nations. Jordy.
Thanks so much, all. And yes, so if you don't know, I'm Jordy Hannum, Executive Director of the Better World campaign. This is actually my 12th UNA Summit, though it's my first virtual one. It's also the first time I put on a suit in 12 months. But for you all, I want to dress appropriately. But I do have to say, you know, I do look forward to this time of year and getting to see old friends and meet new ones, for us all to suffer in the Washington heat together. But the beauty of virtual gatherings, of course, is that so many more can take part in this week of action. And I'm just so heartened to see such a great turnout for it, and the more that we can get folks to preach about the UN, the better. So, yes, I'm a former Hill staffer, and I mean the guidance just given that you all have heard is key. It can't be said enough. Start off telling your story, why you're here. You know, regardless of the fact that it's virtual, the fact that you're taking time out of your day for these issues is incredibly important. So that's really a key advice. I would just want to kind of talk a little bit about some of the kind of hot topics on the Hill, and to underscore some points that you heard over the past 24 hours, and then I'm happy to take questions. But I just have to stress, I mean, you could have not picked a better time to be here, right? I mean, President Biden, Vice President Harris are traveling for their first overseas trips. They're meeting with key allies. You've got Secretary Blinken on the Hill today, tomorrow. You've got U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield on the Hill next week, speaking to the same key offices that you'll be meeting with. So, this is, really an opportune time because of the opportunity that we're presented with. And in the past few years, as you know, we have been on our back foot, right? I mean, we've been fighting for every inch of ground as international affairs funding has been under attack. And fortunately, due to your collective scrappiness, we were able to prevent many of the far-reaching cuts that were proposed. And for that, we are so grateful because we saw what happens when we withdraw, when we turn our back on the world. And I'll give a few examples of that in a moment. Some of them you've heard, but I just want to underscore them. But this is also really a prime opportunity to showcase what happens when we engage with the world, right? For the first time in a number of years, we can be on the offensive, on the front foot. And so I will use my time to talk about, how we lost when we withdraw, but also the importance of engagement. I'll frame this conversation for ease of remembrance around the 4 C's, which I would deem credibility, competition, cooperation, and COVID-19. So for the first C in President Biden's maiden foreign policy speech, and certainly what he'll be talking about this week, he talked about renewing our role in global institutions and, quote, reclaiming our credibility and moral authority. So in the second slide, you'll see this highlighted, but that was a key portion of his speech about the importance of alliances and multilateralism, right? He wasn't afraid to say that word, right? And over the last 4 years, the U.S. downgraded its engagement with the UN system in several ways, which included underfunding, defunding, or outright withdrawing from UN agencies. And while we prevented a lot of what was planned, we cannot stop it all. And we've talked a lot yesterday about arrears, right? For peacekeeping alone, we're $1 billion in arrears for our peace operations. And when we don't pay, it's not UN personnel, right? It's other nations, primarily smaller developing nations like Bangladesh, Ghana. And if you look at this slide, I mean, I think it's important to understand, these shortfalls are $10, $20 million for each country, right? That's a significant amount. That's a huge amount, right? And if you just think about it, from a US perspective, can you imagine if here in the United States, we didn't pay National Guard troops for their service in a natural disaster? There would be outrage, there'd be hearings, but that's currently the case. Peacekeepers are risking their lives in combat. They're countering COVID, right? Right now, peacekeepers are delivering medical equipment, masks, and vaccines were available to those that need it. In the next slide, there was just a story in Newsweek about this, right? Peacekeepers are on the front lines, helping those most in need, right? At the very least, we should pay them, for that sacrifice. And not only because it's the right thing to do, because of the sacrifices that they're making, but because other countries use our arrears against us, right? So in the next slide, if you show it, other countries, China, are using our arrears against us. During her confirmation hearing, Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield stated, and I quote, "We need to pay our bills to have a seat at the table, and we need to make sure that we're there to push back on those who would have malign intentions at the UN," end quote. And that brings us to the next C, competition. Certainly for many in Congress right now, malign intentions refer to China and Russia's actions, right? With respect to China, they are investing more resources at the UN. They're engaging in UN bodies. They're active in bilateral development through initiatives like Belt and Road. Their influence is rising in multilateral organizations. Now, some of what they're doing is welcome and should not be demonized. I want to stress that. And there hasn't been a takeover by China within the UN system, not by any stretch. But the reality is that our massive arrears, our withdrawal from a range of agencies, has meant there's no effective counterweight for the actions that they have taken, especially around human rights. And really, the opposite of withdraw and withhold is engage and invest. And that's what needs to happen, right? This means increasing support for the State Department and USAID, right? It means continuing to rejoin key UN bodies as we've started to do, right? It means paying our dues on time and paying back our arrears. Because if China and Russia are really our key competitors, and many members of Congress have stated, Republican and Democrat, right? This is a focus of the hearing today, will be a focus of the conversation next week, then our approach should follow suit, right? We should counter them on every playing field that exists and marshal available resources. It's common sense, right? In almost every meeting that you have over the next few days, you will have members who have talked about the threat from authoritarian regimes. But we'll be better placed to counter that threat if we show up and are a member in good standing. Without a doubt, you will also have members of Congress in your meetings talk about reform at the UN. And for that, you can quote one of the most well-respected secretaries of state and US ambassadors to the UN of all time, Madeleine Albright. She stated, and I quote, "The failure to pay our old UN bills undermines our ability to recruit allies for the kind of structural reform that Congress demands," right? Put another way, you need a mix of carrots and sticks, okay? And I say this because we know it works, right? It did not work the last 4 years in just walking away, okay? Or in bashing the UN. We were not able to advance key priorities. But as an alternative during the Obama administration, when we were in good standing, the US worked with the UN and allies to significantly reduce peacekeeping costs. We worked to create a human rights upfront office that ensured that all UN entities were prioritizing human rights in their field operations, right? Because we had this, it was one reason why the UN mobilized so quickly to protect civilians in South Sudan after the civil war broke out. But in 2018, China and Russia actually disbanded this initiative, and they used our absence. They used US budget cuts as a pretext, right? How is that in our interest to have it eliminated? Human rights is a priority of Republicans and Democrats. And when we've engaged, we have seen our priorities created, okay? When we don't engage, we've seen many of those dismissed. And that's really a key point. And it brings us to the kind of final two C's, which is working in cooperation, okay? In collaboration with the UN, we're more likely to see results on the ground. Now we'll talk a little bit about COVID-19, just because you can't talk in 2020 and 2021 without bringing it up. But first, as one prime example of the benefits of cooperation, last October, the UN World Food Program, headed by a former South Carolina governor, David Beasley, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for its work around food security, which, I might add, was the 12th time a UN entity has received the prestigious prize. That, by the way, comes as a surprise to many folks that I talked to, but not all of you, I'm sure, due to your collective wisdom on all things UN. But less well known than the Nobel victory, but equally important, last August, Africa was declared free from wild polio. This was deemed a momentous milestone by Bill Gates, many others, right? If you could show this slide, yeah. And it happened because of a coalition of UN health bodies, national and local governments, community volunteers. It wasn't easy. It took decades of work and millions of health workers traveling by foot, by boat, by bus, by bicycle to reach children in remote geographic areas, right? Health workers braving conflict, insurgent groups to prevent children from enduring lifelong disability and paralysis. This is the UN we know. This is why we're here. UN health workers risking their lives in some of the most inhospitable places on the planet to help those in need, right? And this is the point. Cooperation will be key in combating COVID-19. It can only be done, let me repeat, only be done in partnership with the international community and entities like the World Food Program and World Health Organization and UNICEF and UNHCR, right? Globally, as you all know, just 3% of the world's population is fully vaccinated. In parts of Southeast Asia, it's about 2%. In Africa, it's less than 1%. We also know the threats of variants here and abroad. But as it stands, the UN agency, WHO, is at the center of a global cooperative effort to distribute COVID-19 vaccines equitably worldwide. And research has shown that US support for helping low and middle income countries counter COVID around vaccines, but also testing and therapeutics is not only the right thing to do on the humanitarian front, but will benefit the US economically more than any other nation. Okay, there's all sorts of research that shows this, right? And as more vaccines become available, most of humanity will get it through efforts backed by the WHO and multilateral partners. So this is what will ultimately end the pandemic. And it's another profound reason why investing in the UN is so essential, right? And it's not just COVID, but a host of other public health threats like malaria or measles or polio or HIV/AIDS. There's no magic bullet to this. It means investing here and abroad, bilaterally and multilaterally, with our UN as partners and the US as a fully paid up member. So I'll stop there. I'm happy to answer questions. But again, tomorrow, it's not about all kind of repeating all of what I just said, but certainly take any of the information that resonates for you. But again, highlight why you're here. But it's not only is it the timing, but it's just such a great opportunity to stress the importance of engagement. Thank you again, and happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Jordy. For folks that are interested in asking questions, please feel free to share your question in the chat or raise your hand so that we can call on folks to ask questions directly to Jordy. But I also wanted to thank you again, and then those who spoke earlier, Tina, Jay, Alyssa, and Jackson. You all have definitely brought a unique perspective on how to make that compelling case to members of Congress and their staff. And Jordy couldn't agree more. This is such an important time. And for everyone that is maybe doing this for the first time and maybe feeling a little nervous or scared, know that we are committed to helping you out. Earlier, there was a recommendation, to research on your members of Congress and to find out, some common ground that you can find between maybe your own interests and passions and their interests and passions. Luckily, we've included bio information for every member of Congress where we have a meeting scheduled on Attendify. So you can go through the list of speakers, find your respective members of Congress or a member of Congress to learn more about their committees, their bio, where they're from originally. You never know, there might be something in there that surprises you, even if you think you know a lot about your members of Congress overall. So I definitely encourage you before tomorrow to read up on who your members of Congress are so that we can have that little bit of storytelling to give during our respective meetings. It looks like we have a hand raised from Kitchen. I'm going to lower your hand. You can feel free to ask your question.
Yes, Mr. Hannum, that's a wonderful speech, and you're very expert in the United Nations issues. But my question is, you talk about multilateralism. I'm questioning your values you said about secure and proper healthy world. But I'm questioning, are you saying about the world that it only benefit the United States or all other nations? You talk about countering the threat and not demonizing China, but which is against your value of the hegemony of the United States. But I also question the human rights you talk about. The United States human rights just happened in Minneapolis. The basic health rights and life rights of the United States citizens, and some of them does not have a health insurance. And what's your response to that? And what's your response to the United Nations values? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think a couple things. One, one of the messages, we have stressed, on human rights and the importance of engagement is that no country is above scrutiny. I mean, that's been, one of many frustrations over the last few years is that the U.S. Has criticized other countries and yet done a number of things which reflect very poorly. And so we have said the importance of being engaged in different human rights bodies is it makes it easier to say, no country should try to avoid scrutiny. Every country's record can be, improved. So absolutely, we're not kind of saying that the U.S. is above reproach by any stretch. And the other thing is, when we the strongest way to defend our principles, the viewpoints we believe in, is by being engaged, by taking part in the debate and not, walking away and going home. On the issue of China, I mean, it's an important line. I talked a little bit about China just because that is such a big topic right now on Capitol Hill. And again, it's not about demonizing. I gave some examples of ways that China has increased its contributions, particularly around peacekeeping, far more peacekeeping troops than the other Security Council members combined. But they are taking some highly concerning actions around human rights. And they've been able to do that because the US literally walked away from its seat at the Human Rights Council. And so that's an area where Republicans and Democrats have been united, but you're seeing some really concerning things about the prominence of the state over minority rights. Normally, the US has been there to push back and do it in a respectful way, but it's not happening. And so we're saying the US should be engaged. The US should be comfortable enough to take criticism where it's deserved, but also push back where it's warranted.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jordy. Tita, see you have your hand raised. I'm gonna lower your hand.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you so much for this very informative session. I just want to do two things. One is comment on the previous speaker that because we do support the UN and our US support of the UN means that we expect the US also to look at itself. And we have done that over the last year or so in terms of UN USA signing on to certain documents and statements regarding what's going on in the US, just as we look at what goes on in other countries. So that gets us into the arena legitimately. But I also wanted to ask about, as we visit our congressional and senatorial leaders, have you found it effective that as we look at the backgrounds, as Tina was mentioning, that you try to find some intersectionality? Suppose it's a person that attended the same university, or suppose it's a person from your same hometown, or sometimes when we've gone into the in-person meetings, we found staff members who either went to college with some of our delegation or things like that. So finding that common ground, whether it's a personal common ground or even a philosophical common ground, I think has really opened the door in our past meetings. And is that something that you would encourage?
Let me just quickly say, not only would I encourage it, yes, I put an exclamation point by that. I mean, that I can't tell you how many meetings I've been in where the person who's speaking mentions where they're from, and the staffer says, "Oh, I'm also from that town." And then, "Where'd you go to high school?" And with the same high school. Or I mean, there's your story is particularly important because there can be all sorts of connections that you're not even aware of. Where not only maybe a personal connection with that person, but maybe your mother or father or uncle was a teacher at a school or a nurse at a place where the member of Congress worked for a period of time. There's all sorts of ways. So it's a really important way. I mean, it's critical just in the beginning to kind of show that we're not scary globalists. It's become a bad word for some, but we are constituents, live in the community, that have a network, which is important. And there's things that connect us. And so any points that can highlight that are particularly important. So again, I just can't stress enough. In a lot of these meetings, we'll say it in the prep session, and then people go in the first meeting, kind of go right into their talking points, take a moment to talk about why you're there, your connection to the community, and then highlight some key points.
Thank you, Jordy. And we are going to wrap up this part of the plenary because we do have a few roundtable discussions happening shortly afterwards. We're going to take a quick at this point 3-minute break before going into those roundtable discussions, and we do have a closing plenary taking place at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. But again, want to reiterate my appreciation, Jordy, to you, to Alyssa, to Tina, to Jackson, and to Jay for taking the time out of your day to provide that insight and those tips and best practices. Again, want to also end the same way I started off. We can't do the work that we do without all of you. So thank you for your dedication to UNA USA. For those of you who need support or assistance regarding your congressional meetings, if you have not received that information, you could reach out to me directly at msanchez@unausa.org, and I'd be happy to forward you that meeting information to you. Please note that some congressional meetings have not been scheduled because of the lack of availability from congressional offices. You can find the list of scheduled meetings on Attendify in the schedule for reference. So if you do not see your meeting on there, that means that it has not been scheduled. If your meeting is on there and you have not received that meeting information, such as the link and the passcode, like I said, I'd be happy to forward that information over to you. My email is msanchez@unausa.org. But with that, we are going to end it and hope you will all be able to join us for our closing plenary later on this evening. Thanks, everyone.